dad-perfect events. My son's fiancée sat across from me at Sunday lunch and asked for $1.22 million like she was ordering coffee. Just straight up demanded it for her dream wedding. She thought I'd write the check right there. Then Vincent slipped me a note under the table that changed everything. My name is Howard Nelson. I'm 58, retired assistant U.S. attorney, spent 37 years putting financial criminals in federal prison. I thought I'd seen every scam in the book. Turns out the most dangerous ones show up to family dinner, wearing designer clothes and a perfect smile. That particular Sunday started normal enough. Vincent, my 35-year-old son, had invited me to lunch at Morton's Steakhouse downtown Dallas. The place was busy, filled with well-dressed families enjoying their weekend ritual. Vincent had been dating Beverly for about 7 months, and honestly, I was just happy to see him with someone. Since his mother passed 9 years ago, Vincent had been careful about relationships. Too careful, maybe. I'd watched him turn down perfectly good women because something wasn't quite right, and part of me worried he'd end up alone. Beverly Richardson was striking. I'll give her that. Long, dark hair that probably cost more to maintain than most people's car payments. Perfect posture. The kind of woman who knew exactly how good she looked and exactly how to use it. She had this way of tilting her head when she listened that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. Her mother, Linda, usually tagged along to these family meals, which should have been my first red flag. What 32-year-old brings her mom to every dinner with her boyfriend's family? Linda Richardson was in her late 50s, dressed in what looked like expensive clothes, but with a kind of careful styling that suggested she was trying to project wealth rather than actually having it. She had the same calculating eyes as Beverly, though she tried harder to hide it behind practiced Southern charm and comments about family values. Vincent looked tense when I arrived at our usual corner booth. I noticed it immediately, the way he kept adjusting his napkin, checking his phone, the forced quality of his smile when Beverly touched his arm. His shoulders were rigid under his dress shirt, and he had that pale look he used to get as a kid when he knew he was in trouble. But I figured it was just pre-wedding jitters. They'd gotten engaged 3 weeks earlier, and Vincent had seemed genuinely excited when he called to tell me. The restaurant was one of those upscale places where the servers know your drink order and the lighting is soft enough to make everyone look 10 years younger. Our usual waiter, Miguel, brought my bourbon without being asked, a double maker's mark, neat. Vincent ordered his typical club soda with lime, which should have been another warning sign. He usually had a beer with lunch. Howard, Beverly said, leaning forward with that brilliant smile as she opened a leather portfolio that looked like it cost more than my monthly utilities. I'm so excited to share our wedding plans with you. Instead of the usual talk about venues or dates, Beverly spread glossy photos and typed documents across the white tablecloth. The portfolio was clearly expensive real leather, gold-embossed corners, the kind of presentation folder that serious businesses use for major proposals. Vincent and I have been working with Dallas's top wedding planner. She began, her voice taking on a business-like quality that made something in my prosecutor's gut tighten. We've calculated that for the wedding we envision, we'll need exactly $1.2 million. The bourbon arrived in a heavy crystal glass. I took a slow sip, watching her face over the rim. Vincent's knuckles were white around his water glass, and I could see a muscle jumping in his jaw. 1.2 million, I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. That's very specific. Oh, it breaks down precisely, Beverly said, warming to her subject. Her eyes had a gleam I'd seen before in deposition rooms when a witness thought they had the perfect story rehearsed. The venue alone is $600,000. We're looking at the mansion on Turtle Creek for 250 guests. She flipped to a page showing the hotel's ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and marble columns. Then $300,000 for floral arrangements and decor. I've always dreamed of having white orchids flown in from Thailand, and the ice sculptures alone will be $50,000. Beverly paused dramatically, touching her collarbone in what I'm sure she thought was a demure gesture. My dress is $150,000. Vera Wang is designing it personally. It's a once-in-a-lifetime piece, hand-beaded with Swarovski crystals. Linda jumped in then, her voice syrupy with false warmth. Our family has certain standards. Howard, Beverly is our only daughter, and we want her day to be absolutely perfect. Nothing but the best. I glanced at Vincent. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. And when our eyes met for just a second, I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a scared 10-year-old who'd broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. Pure, desperate panic. 1.2 million, I said again, setting down my glass carefully on the white tablecloth. And you're sharing this budget with me because... Beverly's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. Well, traditionally, the groom's family contributes significantly to wedding expenses. Vincent mentioned that you're comfortable financially. comfortable. What a delicate way to assess someone's bank account over lunch. I'd heard that exact phrasing before in wire fraud cases where victims described how criminals fished for information about their assets. I see. I picked up the menu, scanning it as if this were any normal Sunday. The lunch crowd was thinning out around us, but Beverly's voice carried a forced brightness that seemed to echo off the restaurant's marble walls. And have you considered what Vincent thinks about this budget? Kevin wants me to be happy, Beverly said smoothly, her hand sliding over to cover Vincent's on the table. He didn't return the gesture, and I watched his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Don't you, honey? Vincent opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His eyes darted between Beverly and me like he was watching a tennis match where the stakes were his entire future. We've discussed that this is important to Beverly. Vincent understands that if his family truly cares about him, they'll want to see him start his marriage properly. Beverly cut him off smoothly, her voice taking on a sharper edge. With the respect and celebration he deserves. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Support this financial demand or you don't really support your son. I'd seen this manipulation tactic in domestic abuse cases, isolate the victim by making their support system choose sides. That's when I felt something brush against my knee under the table. Vincent's hand passing me something small and folded. I palmed it smoothly, a skill I'd learned from watching drug dealers do the same thing in federal courtrooms for nearly 4 decades. The paper felt warm from his sweaty palm, and I could tell he'd pressed hard with the pen, probably torn it from the small notepad he always carried for work. Linda was watching me carefully now, her manicured fingers drumming silently on the table. Howard, you seem hesitant. Is there a problem with our timeline? Just processing the information, I said mildly, slipping the note into my jacket pocket without looking at it. It's quite a lot to absorb over lunch. Beverly leaned back in the booth, and I caught the subtle change in her demeanor. The sweetness was evaporating like morning dew. I would think that for your only son's wedding, no expense would be too great. But perhaps I'm mistaken about the kind of family Vincent comes from. There it was, minus the manipulation laid bare. Make it about love and loyalty instead of the absurd amount of money being demanded. Attack the family bond when reason fails. Under the table, I carefully unfolded the paper Vincent had passed me. Without looking down, I ran my thumb across it, feeling the indentations of pen strokes. Whatever he'd written, he'd pressed so hard I could feel the letters carved into the paper like braille. The note was small, maybe torn from his work notepad, the kind he used for project management meetings. I kept my eyes on Beverly as she continued her pitch, talking about vintage Dom Perignon champagne and custom invitations with gold leaf lettering, all while my thumb traced the desperate message my son had carved into that scrap of paper. When I'd felt enough to understand what he'd written, my blood went cold. But 37 years of prosecuting criminals had taught me something crucial. The moment you show your hand is the moment you lose control. So I smiled and nodded at appropriate moments, listening to Beverly's increasingly aggressive sales pitch while my mind processed what Vincent had just told me. Dad, she's a scammer. Already took $28 K help me. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The circles under his eyes that I'd dismissed as work stress from his project management job. The weight he'd lost over the past few months. The way he kept checking his phone with an expression close to dread whenever Beverly wasn't watching. How had I missed this? But I knew how. After Margaret died 9 years ago, I'd thrown myself into work to avoid the silence of our house in Highland Park. When I finally retired 3 years ago, I'd filled the void with consulting work and my hobby of restoring antique legal texts. I'd been so pleased that Vincent had finally found someone that I hadn't asked the questions a former federal prosecutor should have asked. Questions like why a 32-year-old woman with no apparent career was living in a luxury high-rise apartment in uptown Dallas, or why every conversation seemed to circle back to money and status symbols, or why Vincent's close-knit circle of friends from college had mysteriously shrunk since he'd started dating Beverly. You're awfully quiet, Howard, Linda observed, her tone sharp despite the practiced smile. Her accent had a slight edge to it now, less refined than when she'd first sat down. I shifted my attention to her, seeing another detail I'd overlooked, the way she choreographed these interactions, always present, always managing the flow of conversation. This wasn't a daughter asking her mother for wedding planning support. This was a coordinated operation. Just thinking, I said pleasantly, taking another sip of bourbon. Beverly's eyes narrowed slightly, thinking about what? About the details, I said, watching both women's faces carefully. $1.2 million is a significant investment. I assume you have detailed contracts from all these vendors. Signed agreements with the quoted prices. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. I could hear the soft jazz playing over the sound system, the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the muted conversations from other tables. But at our booth, nobody spoke. Beverly's perfect composure cracked just slightly around the edges. Linda recovered first, her voice taking on a defensive quality. Well, naturally, we're still in the planning stages. So you're asking for $1.2 million based on estimates. I interrupted, my prosecutor's instincts taking over. No contracts, no guarantees, just ideas and possibilities. Beverly's cheeks flushed pink, but she quickly composed herself. It's not about paperwork, Howard. It's about trust. It's about family. Actually, I said, my voice remaining conversational despite the tension crackling across the table. When someone asks me for $1.2 million, it's absolutely about the paperwork. I could see her recalculating, trying to figure out which approach would work on me. The sweet fiancé routine had failed. The guilt-tripping about family loyalty wasn't landing. Now she was moving towards something else, righteous indignation mixed with wounded victim. Maybe this was a mistake, Beverly said, her voice trembling just slightly in what I recognized as a practice performance. Maybe Vincent and I should just elope, save everyone the trouble of dealing with this. Vincent's hand jerked toward her instinctively, then stopped midair. I watched the conflict play out on his face, the desperate desire to fix this situation, to make everyone happy, even as he'd literally just told me she was scamming him. The kid was torn between his heart and his brain, and his heart was losing badly. This was it. The pivotal moment where I could let this play out naturally, watch my son make what might be the most expensive mistake of his life. Or I could do what I'd done for 37 years in federal court, cut through the lies and force the truth into the light. I smiled. It was the same smile I used to give defense attorneys who thought they were clever, right before I demolished their entire case with one piece of evidence they'd overlooked. Prove it, I said quietly. Beverly blinked, momentarily thrown off script. What? Prove it. Prove that this wedding actually costs $1.2 million. Show me detailed estimates from real vendors with real company names and tax ID numbers. Show me signed proposals. Show me anything that demonstrates this isn't just a number you pulled out of thin air. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Linda's eyes had gone hard as flint, and I could practically see the wheels turning behind them. You have 48 hours, I continued, pulling out my phone and making a show of setting a reminder. 2 days to provide documentation for every single dollar you're requesting. If this wedding truly costs $1.2 million, proving it should be simple. This is insulting, Linda hissed, abandoning any pretense of Southern charm. This is due diligence, I corrected. Something I should have done months ago when Vincent first started talking about his serious girlfriend. I stood up slowly, my 6-foot frame casting a shadow across their elaborate wedding portfolio. I pulled out my wallet and dropped several 20s on the table, enough to cover everyone's meal and a generous tip from Miguel, who didn't deserve to get stiffed because of family drama. Son, I said, looking directly at Vincent, I need to speak with you privately. Beverly's manicured hand shot out to grab Vincent's arm. Vincent, you don't have to listen to this. Your father is trying to control your life. Yes, I said quietly, my prosecutor's voice cutting through the restaurant noise like a blade. He does have to listen. Because this is my son, and I will not stand by and watch him be manipulated. Not anymore. The look Beverly gave me then was pure, undiluted hatred. Gone was any pretense of the sweet, loving fiancé. In that moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw exactly what Vincent had seen. A predator who just realized her prey's father wasn't going to be as easy to handle as his lovesick son. Vincent stood on unsteady legs, his face pale but determined. As we walked toward the restaurant exit, I could hear Linda's voice behind us, sharp and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. Beverly's response was even quieter, but the tone was venomous. The Dallas heat hit us like a wall when we stepped outside onto the sidewalk. Even in late October, the Texas sun could still pack a punch. Vincent leaned against my car, a black BMW that represented one of my few retirement indulgences, and ran his hands through his hair. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to get out of it, Vincent. I put my hand on his shoulder, feeling how thin he'd gotten under his dress shirt. You have nothing to apologize for. You're the victim here, not the perpetrator. We drove to my house in Highland Park in relative silence. Vincent stared out the passenger window at the familiar tree-lined streets where he'd grown up, probably wondering how his life had gotten so complicated. My house, our old family house, sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, a 2-story colonial that Margaret and I had bought when Vincent was in elementary school. In my study, surrounded by law books and the mahogany desk where I'd prepared countless federal cases, Vincent finally broke down and told me everything. The story unfolded over 2 hours like a textbook case study in financial manipulation. It had started so perfectly, he said. They'd met at a charity fundraiser for the Dallas Children's Hospital. Beverly had approached him, complimented his work with the tech company, actually seemed interested when he talked about project management strategies. She'd asked intelligent questions, remembered details from previous conversations, made him feel heard. When did the money talk start? I asked, pouring him a whiskey from the bottle I kept for difficult conversations. Second date, Vincent laughed bitterly. She asked what neighborhood I lived in, where I grew up, what you did for a living before you retired. I thought she was just getting to know me, making conversation, but I knew better. Those weren't conversation starters. Those were asset assessments disguised as getting to know you questions. Beverly had been evaluating Vincent's financial potential from the very beginning. The isolation was gradual. Vincent continued. My friend Matt was too negative. Jessica from work was clearly jealous of our relationship. Derek worked too many hours and was a bad influence on my work-life balance. Before I knew it, the only people I was spending time with were Beverly and Linda. Classic technique. Cut the victim off from outside perspectives so nobody can raise red flags or offer alternative viewpoints. Over the next hour, Vincent painted a picture that made my blood pressure spike with each detail. The emergency car repair that Beverly needed help with minus $8,000 for a BMW she'd crashed while texting, though she claimed someone had hit her in a parking lot. The family medical bills that Linda couldn't quite cover minus $6,000 for procedures that I was now certain never happened. And the investment opportunity in a friend's boutique minus $14,000 into a business that Vincent had never actually seen proof existed. $28,000 in 7 months. Vincent, desperate to prove himself a worthy partner to this sophisticated woman, had handed over nearly half his annual savings without question. The wedding demand felt different though, Vincent said, his voice hollow, more aggressive. When I suggested we could have something smaller, maybe $200,000 instead, she actually threw a wine glass at my kitchen wall. Then immediately apologized, cried, said she was just stressed about disappointing her mother's expectations. Escalation. They were testing how far they could push him before he broke. Vincent, I said, setting down my whiskey, has Beverly ever asked you to transfer money to specific accounts that weren't clearly hers? His face went pale. The boutique investment, she said her friend's business partner handled the financial side, gave me routing numbers for some business account in Austin. I'd prosecuted this exact scheme in 2018. Different players, same playbook. That night, after Vincent left to face whatever drama awaited him at his apartment, I made calls to contacts I hadn't used in years. Leonard Hayes, a private investigator who'd worked several of my financial fraud cases. Theodore Walsh, a family law attorney who specialized in asset protection and fraud recovery. Gerald Foster at the Attorney General's Financial Crimes Division. Richard Porter, Leonard said when he answered, sounding wide awake despite the late hour. Haven't heard from you since your retirement party. Missed the action? Something like that. I need background on 2 women, deep background. Financial records, previous relationships, property holdings, the works, this official business. Personal. My son's fiancée and her mother. I think they're running a wedding scam. Leonard whistled low. How personal are we talking? 28,000 personal so far, but they're fishing for 1.2 million. I'll have preliminary results by Wednesday. Full report by next week. The 48 hours I'd given Beverly passed without a single piece of documentation. No vendor contracts, no signed proposals, nothing. Instead, at hour 47, she sent Vincent a text message that I screenshotted for evidence. Spoke with our wedding planner. She says verbal agreements are standard in luxury events. Detailed contracts come after deposits. You do trust me, don't you, beautiful? She was creating a narrative where asking for proof became an act of betrayal. Leonard's call came on Friday morning. Your instincts were spot on, he said. Without preamble, Beverly Richardson, born Beverly Christine Martinez. 4 previous engagements in 6 years, all in Texas. All ended 2 to 3 weeks before the wedding date. I grabbed a notepad, my old prosecutor habits kicking in. Tell me about them. First one, Houston. Norman Pierce, tech entrepreneur, lost $85,000 in wedding deposits. Same pattern, luxury wedding plans, vague documentation, money transferred to various vendors that turned out to be shell companies. Second engagement, Austin. Eugene Carter, real estate developer, $120,000. Third was San Antonio, Arthur Reynolds, investment banker, $180,000. The amounts were escalating. They were getting bolder with each victim. Arthur actually hired a lawyer, Leonard continued. Started investigating when Beverly kept delaying contract reviews. Found out 8 of the 15 vendors on her list were fake companies, bank accounts registered to various names, all connected back to Linda Richardson through shared addresses. Did he prosecute? Wanted to, but his attorney advised against it. Said proving intent to defraud would be difficult, and Beverly could claim the vendor relationships had gone bad after she'd paid deposits in good faith, so they'd refine the scam over 4 previous victims. Total documented losses, $413,000, not counting Vincent. That same afternoon, Beverly made her biggest tactical error. She sent Vincent a detailed wedding budget via email minus 35 pages of vendor breakdowns, service descriptions, and costs totaling $1 million. It looked professional, thorough, completely legitimate. I forwarded it to Leonard. How long to verify these vendors? His response came back within 3 hours. 14 of these companies don't exist. The others are real businesses, but when I called pretending to be a groom checking references, none have contracts or even conversations with anyone named Beverly Richardson or Martinez. Perfect. She just provided written evidence of fraud. I called Theodore Walsh. I need you to prepare for war. My son's being targeted by professional wedding scammers, and I want criminal charges that stick. How strong is your evidence? Strong enough that they'll be begging for plea deals. 2 weeks later, Beverly delivered the final nail in her own coffin. She sued Vincent for breach of promise to marry, demanding $800,000 for emotional distress and lost opportunities. Her bottom-feeder attorney had cobbled together a case built entirely on emotional manipulation. At the hearing, Theodore played the recording Vincent had made of Beverly's conversation with Linda. She cheerfully agreed to be recorded when Vincent suggested it for relationship transparency. The audio was crystal clear. Beverly calling Vincent weak and discussing how to milk this situation before moving to their next target city. Judge Carol Henderson's expression grew harder with each damning word. The plaintiff's suit is dismissed with prejudice, she announced. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Dallas County District Attorney's Office for investigation of fraud. Beverly's face crumpled. Linda looked like she wanted to run. Outside the courthouse, I called Gerald Foster. 20 minutes later, arrest warrants issued for Beverly Richardson and Linda Richardson. Wire fraud, organized criminal activity. The federal charges hit hard. Beverly got 6 years, Linda got 8 because of prior convictions. Joint restitution of $485,000 to all victims. 6 months later, Vincent was dating a school teacher named Sarah who laughed when he mentioned Beverly's $102 million wedding budget. For that much money, she said we could buy a house and take a really nice honeymoon. As for me, turns out you can retire from prosecution, but the prosecutor never really retires from you. When someone demands $1.2 million over Sunday lunch, they should remember there might be someone at that table who spent 37 years learning to spot a con artist. Beverly Richardson learned that lesson the hard way. She's got 6 years to think about it. Sometimes the most expensive lessons come disguised as love. But when you have someone in your corner who knows the difference between genuine affection and calculated manipulation, those lessons become a lot cheaper. Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets, but wisdom is passed down from father to son, one Sunday lunch at a time. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's using everything you've learned in 37 years to make sure the people you love never have to learn those lessons the hard way. Love makes you vulnerable, but family makes you strong. And sometimes that strength comes with 37 years of federal prosecution experience attached. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. But when they try to fool your family, that's when you show them who you really are.